Thank you for joining us as we recognize Black History Month. To enjoy more library programming like this for you and your family, subscribe to DC Public Library on YouTube, download the DCPL app, and follow us at DCPL on Facebook and Twitter. Take care.
The Washington Mystics select Ariel Atkins.
I'm just excited to be here. I want to be one of the best to come out of the game. It was just, this is what we're going to do. This is what we got to do. Let's do it. This isn't just about basketball. We aren't just basketball players. No justice! It's hard to be vulnerable in these moments, but I think if we do this unified as a league, it looks different.
Hello, I'm Kevin Merida, Editor-in-Chief of The Undefeated. We're a multimedia platform that explores the intersections of race, sports, and culture, and we're so excited to welcome you to Black History Always with The Undefeated. We know that there's Black History Month, and that is an important month to focus on our achievement as a people. But this concept of Black History Always is really intended to remind us all that we're making history in real time. We're pioneering and shaking up the world. And many of you are doing that in your own communities and neighborhoods and with your own aspirations. When I think about libraries, I think about learning and the ability to create new environments and to go to places to read and to see the possibilities that exist in you all. And it's thrilling to be able to team up with the library to create these amazing conversations so that you can think about how do you go out and change the world one day at a time in your corner of the world and achieve all your dreams. At The Undefeated, we're here to help you push your dreams. And I say to everybody out there, and particularly the teenagers, there's nothing that you can't do. And be. And we're so excited to be here. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Mary Ann James Daly, Director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library. I'm so pleased to welcome you to Black History Always with The Undefeated. In today's conversation, you will get to see how the library is a place for you to have real conversations and create change. DC Public Library's teen employees who are hosting the conversation are a great example of how we can create change in our communities together. Through their hard work, their creativity, and their advocacy, they make libraries in DC a better place. Black History Always with The Undefeated celebrates Black changemakers. Our namesake, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., had powerful ideas about humanity, equity, and compassion. His gift of words helped us connect with his ideas and make change. Through this series, you will get to hear from people who use their talents, whether it's words, athleticism, artistry, or advocacy, to do just that, connect with us and help us make change. Enjoy today's program.
Hello, my name is Destiny Coburn, and I'm a member of the DC Public Library's Teen Council program. I'm excited to be with you all here tonight and to welcome you the first episode of Black History Always with The Undefeated. Black History Always is a series where we can come together and learn from people who work at an intersection, exploring issues of race, their life, and career. Let me introduce to you my co-hosts, Blair, Gary, and James, and today's guests. Our first guest comes to us from The Undefeated, where she works as their culture critic. She writes about pop culture, fashion, the arts, and literature. She is the 2020 winner of the George Jean Nathan Prize for Dramatic Criticism, a 2020 finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and the runner-up for the 2019 Vernon Jarrett Medal for Outstanding Reporting on Black Life. Ms. Soraya Nadia McDonald, thank you for joining us here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Next, please welcome a guard from the Washington Mystics. Drafted by the Mystics in 2018, She helped lead them to their WNBA championship win in 2019. She also uses the platform she has available, like interviews and her social media presence, to bring attention to systemic racism, police violence, and the Black Lives Matter movement. Miss Ariel Atkins, it is a pleasure to have you with us here today as well.
Thank you for having me.
Now let's get the conversation started. This question is for both of you, starting with Miss McDonald. Take it as you will, but what is your origin story?
Uh, what is my origin story? Like, how did I become the person I am today? Is that what you mean?
Let's say, how did you find your love for your craft? Where did that start?
Oh, okay. Um, well, probably like I think even before I learned that I liked writing, I really loved reading. Um, and so I would say it probably came from there. That was basically my favorite activity when I was growing up, and very often still is. Um, and so I mean, basically, what I do is critique like different methods of storytelling, because they can exist in a variety of forms, whether it's the written word or, dance choreography or, a play or a TV show or a film, or an opera. And so I'm just really lucky that I have the job I do now that lets me do all of those things, that really kind of came out of just like always having my head in a book when I was a kid.
Miss Atkins, feel free to join in.
Yeah, origin story. I feel like that's a pretty deep question. But I guess I'll kind of start off by just kind of how my family is. Both of my parents work for themselves. So it was really ingrained in me, I guess, from a young age to whatever I wanted to do. I knew I was gonna have to go and get it. There wasn't much of a, oh, you can be anything you want to be. It was that, but you had to work for it. So I definitely say that's a huge part of my origin story and me finding my love for my craft, which currently is the game of basketball. You have to work at it. It's something that you have to get better at every single day. And it's not really a day that you can just take off or a time that you can take off, because there's always other people that are out there working as well.
Seeing as how those elements have affected you both, how did that help you matriculate through high school and find where you are today?
Well, I mean, it turned out to be really valuable, particularly because I don't know if this is so much the case now, because there are more colleges that have sort of, that don't rely, so heavily on standardized test scores. But, I was always, that was something that was like hugely important, right, when I was in high school. And so like I always did well on like the reading and like writing sections. I was not terribly great with math. It's not my favorite subject.
I'm
But
late too.
yeah. Yeah. But like aside from that, I mean, it's just I don't know, like I think, I really loved reading fiction when I was growing up. And being able to kind of just drop into lots of different worlds, um, and just sort of imagine things through the eyes of the protagonists that I was reading about, which I think can be helpful like in high school, like not just with sort of like assignments and like reading comprehension, but also just like relating to people, and your peers, and just having like a better sense of all the sort of like various directions that people come from. You know, that you meet them at this particular point in your life that you happen to be at. So yeah.
Wow. That to me, because I'm an aspiring writer as well. There's a sense of pressure once you go,
Yeah.
you're like, okay, do I actually want to go through and keep doing this? Did you ever start feeling that pressure as you got older? Even
Oh
maybe
my God. Are you kidding? Every time I have to write something new, I'm just like, why in the world did I like, is there any other job, please? It never, I don't know that it never really gets easier. Um, but like, that's also, I think, part of the fun of writing. In fact, I bet that in that respect, Ariel, like you as an athlete, you know, I know in order, so first off, like when I was in high school, I was really interested in sports writing in particular. And so I think I put a lot of pressure on myself because, I mean, just looking at the environment of sports journalism at the time, like there just weren't that many women who were visible. Um, and you know, certainly there wasn't anybody doing like color commentary or play by play. Like if you watched, I really used to love football, but I would get really frustrated because I would watch these football games, and if there was a woman at all, she was always doing injuries, and that was it, like on the sideline. um, and so uh, I don't know, I mean, I think when I was in high school, like writing and reading were still very much kind of an escape for me. Um, I don't think I like sort of fully grasped the stakes, even though, you know, I wrote like, I don't know how many college application essays. Um, but I just kind of, you know, I think, and like for one college application, I don't even think I wrote a whole essay. Like I sent them a poem I wrote about a Miles Davis song. They let me in. So like that worked
Nice.
out. But yeah, it was something, you know, because I wasn't like doing it professionally. It yeah, it was, I don't know. I didn't necessarily, there wasn't a sort of tension around it. I think there is now. Particularly because like I had this sort of ridiculous year last year where like people wanted to give me prestigious awards, and then I kind of felt like, oh man, now I have to live up to these, like I
Right.
I
Right.
really can't like flop. um, but you know, like I am lucky in that I'm a person who can like continually looks for challenges. And what I was saying, I think before I froze, is that like I bet there's something in Ariel where there's a similar sort of drive and willingness to like step up to challenges instead of being intimidated by them. Or if you are intimidated by them, like finding a place where you can kind of like quiet that voice and just be like, I'm gonna do it anyway.
100%.
And so like that's what I basically do now, because I'm like, oh great, there, you know, it's nice kind of like when you're writing and nobody really knows who you are. And you can sort of lie to yourself and be like, nobody's gonna read this. And then you can just kind of do what you want. Once you find some measure of success, and then like it gets harder to delude yourself into still believing that, then you have to be like, all right, like this is, I have created this challenge for myself and I'm just gonna have to like get it done.
Right.
Miss
I
Ash-
love your mindset.
yes, definitely. It's like almost an all or nothing type view. I love that.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I just don't want to look like an idiot on the internet. That's really what it is.
Everyone's nightmare. Miss
Yeah.
Atkins, can you attest to that pressure? Has that pressure alleviated since you've become a championship winner? Like, how does that feel?
No, it doesn't. Like Soraya was saying here, it honestly, it kind of builds on itself. But I think the beauty of it is when you really enjoy something that you do, there's only so much pressure that like the outside world can put on top of you. It's at some point you're honestly just challenging yourself. It's like you as a writer, like as of now, it's kind of okay because to her point, not many people are reading it, but once you start really falling in love with your work and you're doing it and you're working very hard, I'm pretty sure she's put out some pieces that she didn't care if anybody liked it or not, but she enjoys her work, you know? And so I think it's a balance. And the word balance is interesting to me because it's never really 50-50 like people say. But it definitely is kind of finding that sweet space for you to where pressure is a thing, but it doesn't exist in like your own realm because you have your own expectations for yourself.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, I think one of my like favorite quotations that I still have like on a sticky note on my computer monitor is from Billie Jean King. She says, "Pressure is a privilege." And so like that's when I start to get like overwhelmed, I kind of like try to take a few deep breaths and like and come back to that idea.
Right.
I love it. I love it. And as Black women, there's a lot of pressure on us already. We're already, not really ahead of the game, and you have to work. And as you said, Miss Atkins, that your parents taught you how to work, and that's something I feel like I can relate to because my parents taught me the same thing. Being in this program has taught me a lot of things about independence, being able to work with new people, and especially during this month, it's beautiful that we can have an event like this where we could talk to other Black women, which is why I want to ask the question, what does this month mean to you? And either one of you could hop in and kind of elaborate on how you feel about that.
Yeah. I mean, I'll start. It means a lot to me simply because I learned so much during Black History Month. I haven't always been the type of person that has tried to delve into my history, and it's not because I never wanted to learn about it. It's just something that there's a lot of things when we talk about our culture, there's some things we just don't talk about. There are some things that we just don't bring up. And so this month for me is honestly, it's a lot of me more so learning than putting stuff out because I don't know, that's just kind of how this month works for me. And I really appreciate everybody who takes the time to do the research and give us correct and real information because it's so refreshing to see different names and different faces come up that look like us. Because
Right.
you hear the same things in school, but we've been hearing about Martin Luther King Jr. since we were like 4. And it's like,
Exactly.
who was around him, you know? So I love this month because I get to see so many new faces and new things that I had no idea. I'm like, oh, our people did that? Oh, okay. You know, like that, it makes me feel really good.
That's beautiful. And I most definitely can relate to, finding out new things this month. I see your locks look beautiful, and I've been learning so much about my hair too. I'm trying to get them as long as you. So with the hair care, I've been learning about like Black products, stuff like that, just different stuff over the quarantine and this month. So I can most definitely attest to that. Miss McDonald?
Well, what I was going to say is, so I'm lucky, like one of the great things about working for the Undefeated is that I kind of like, it is Black History Always, right? Like I get to just sort of do these kind of deep dives into different areas of Black history and like keep learning, which is basically, that's probably like one of my favorite parts of my job is that like there's always more to like feed my curiosity. But one of the things that I really like about sort of the way that Black History Month has kind of like grown and evolved, from like 1926 when Carter G. Woodson created like Negro History Week, is like because there are folks who we can sort of, I don't want to say take for granted, but we at least have kind of like a common like foundational understanding of their importance. Then we get to look at all of these other sort of interesting people, and they don't even necessarily have to be famous. And so one of my favorite books right now is Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments by Cynthia Hartman. Because this is exactly, like she is wonderful at like finding just really interesting things about like regular people who might otherwise kind of get overlooked. And you know, like some of that is, you know, it's not necessarily always triumphant, right? Because like not everything about like, I mean, there's a lot of sort of, um, you know, darkness and solemnity in our history, but like that's not all that it is.
Right.
And so like I think one of my favorite things now about it's just like just sort of doing these deep dives into the ways that like everyday people find to, you know, find little bits of joy to be happy. You know, whether it is like a few lines of poetry or, you know, I mean, there's just so many ways that uh, that Black people, I think, like innovate everything.
Right.
Um, and so, you know, there are all these like wonderful women in particular. You know, when it comes to music, when we think about the blues, when we think about jazz, when we think about hip hop. Um, and so like one of the things that's fun for me in particular, because like I usually, you know, I see the ways like folks often can kind of talk about someone like Megan Thee Stallion or or City Girls or some of these other rappers. Although I don't think anybody should be holding concerts like during a pandemic. That's the bad idea. But in terms of the way that they sort of embrace their agency and their sexuality, and people are like, oh, you know, like, you know, this is a new thing, and like, you know, they should have some sort of shame. And like it's hilarious to me because I'm just like, do you understand like Bessie Smith? Or you know Josephine Baker, or you know there's a whole sort of like litany of Black women who have come before them, you know, who have also, you know, people have also tried to sort of like cast aspersions on and like clutch their pearls. And I'm like, you know, like uh of course there are like elements of modernity about their work, but like you know, the wonderful thing about art is that you basically find that there are through lines that like no matter what generation you are, right? People are writing songs and movies and novels about heartbreak and about you know, trying to like figure out what your purpose is in life, or like, you know, like big and small things. And so yeah, I really just like finding out about like how people just kind of like get through the world and their
Right.
lives, especially in like times where you're just like, oh my God, like how did you do this?
Right. Yeah, honestly, I'm a big fan of City Girls and Megan. I think they're wonderful women.
I am too.
Right.
I wish my knees could do that.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Megan is something. We
Yeah,
love her.
I definitely agree, because you was talking about other Black women and how there was people before them, such as Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. If
There
you
you
haven't
go.
seen it, that movie on Netflix, her songs, amazing.
It's
But
wonderful.
Miss McDonald,
Yeah.
the next question is for you. As a teenager, I remember you saying that reading is something that inspired you, but I wanted to ask, who also inspired and sparked you to be that award-winning reporter and culture critic that you are?
Oh. Um, I mean, okay, so the people I read like when I was a kid are obviously different from like what I read now. Um, and like when I was growing up, my favorite writers were Beverly Cleary and Judy Blume. Like I would say when I was in probably like elementary school and middle school.
I love Judy as well.
Yeah, she's like, yes. I I also I know I have a copy like somewhere behind me of A Wrinkle in Time because I really loved
Oh,
Madeleine L'Engle. Um,
What'd you think of
I
Ian?
I was not a fan of that particular adaptation, which I did write about.
Me neither, honestly.
The visuals were nice.
Yeah, yes. I mean, it's like that is a hard book, I think, to translate to screen.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's not entirely on Ava. Um, but then like I'm trying to think. Oh, okay. So I went through a phase where I was like really into Tennessee Williams. Um, because he was just like his characters are so like dramatic and messy and just fun, and then like when you watch the film adaptations, right? When you watch like A Streetcar Named Desire or Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, right, where you're sort of like watching, especially with Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and you're kind of watching like Elizabeth Taylor sort of at the height of like her full powers, and you're just like,
Right.
oh my God. But also, oh gosh, I went through a phase where I was like just completely addicted to Walter Dean Myers. Who else? Oh gosh, I went through a lot of phases. Like now, I would say the folks who I read regularly, like just for pleasure, like not necessarily because I'm having to read for work. Helen Oyeyemi, who wrote, oh gosh, she's got like a bunch of novels at this point. She has a new one coming out called Pearl. Roxane Gay, Tracy McMillan Cottom. I feel like I read more nonfiction now. But like, what else have I really? Oh, okay. And then like, yeah, I love Toni Morrison. I read The Bluest Eye. That was the first book of hers that I read when I was in high school. And then, and like, there's something sort of like bewitching about her writing because it can feel sort of simple, but she's dealing with all these like really complicated ideas. And as I've gotten older, I think there's this wonderful moment in this documentary about her where her friend Sonia Sanchez basically says, like, you should read Toni Morrison like once a decade to sort of maintain your own sanity. And so like I actually wrote about like reading the same book of hers, about reading Sula when I was like 17, and then again when I was 25, and then again when I was 35. And one of the things that's just such a gift about her writing is revisiting the characters and how much you sort of understand about them just from having like lived a few more years of life and having experienced different things. So she's like really wonderful in that way, because I feel like you can sort of like you kind of grow with her with her writing,
Right.
so that like you can keep coming back to it over and over.
I understand. I do. I've read Toni Morrison's books on multiple occasions. Like, and I do. I honestly do love them. Miss Atkins, hello. My next question is for you. As you know, it is Black History Month. So I want to ask you, who do you look up? Who do you look back on when you think of Black history?
Oof. Well, I'm just gonna say the first person that popped in my head was definitely my grandmother. I know we can all attest to the grandmothers being the OGs of the family.
Oh yeah,
She has all the knowledge, both of my grandmothers. They're rocks, man. They always have the answer, and if they don't have the answer, you would know it because they always act like they do. But they are the historians of my family. If there's a story that I need to hear, they always have it. But my grandmothers, I love them to death, and they're Black history for me and my family. So definitely my grandmothers.
My follow-up question is, now as in your career as a WNBA star, who are some Black history figures who have inspired you to be the way you are right now?
Oof, that's a tough one. Black history figures who have inspired me to be the way that I am now.
Please say Cheryl Miller.
Let's go with it. Cheryl Miller. There's so many. What a lot of people don't really understand about the WNBA, in my personal opinion, is our league is pretty much around 80% of Black women. And so the things that we deal with on a daily is not what most people see. You think we're WNBA stars, you think like we're these big celebrities, we're A-listed. I mean, there's a few of them, and not many of them are Black. And so I think when we just talk about people who have encouraged me and inspired me over time, period, is the WNBA as a whole. Every woman that's gone through this organization, because they are the trailblazers. They are the ones that really figured out what it meant to not only be a Black athlete, but knew kind of the daunting path of being a Black female athlete in a space where it's really man dominant, male dominant. And so I appreciate every single one of them, because not only did they, blaze the trail, there's still a lot of them I talk to this day. And they're always very helpful and being like, hey, well, we were around, this was that. And, they really put things into perspective for us. So I would definitely say all the women of the NBA, but, put a huge asterisk by Shara Miller there.
Beautiful,
Miss
beautiful.
Atkins,
Right.
Miss Atkins, you've had an amazing basketball career so far, bringing home a championship to the DC for the first time. Who do you like? Who's one of your biggest inspirations for your drive to win things like the championship?
To win things, I would say kind of outside of basketball is my family. I'm really big on family. They always push me. Being from Texas, it's pretty hard living all the way in DC on the East Coast. So making sure that they're always in the loop. I'm talking to them as much as I can. And then basketball wise, my favorite player growing up was Tamika Catchings. She's kind of a Texas girl, we'll go with that. But we did go to the same high school. And she's a winner through and through, but more often than not, a lot of people know her, yes, for her championships and what she's done as a basketball player, but her heart and her soul is different. And that's something I really appreciate about her as a human being.
That's amazing.
I love to hear it. I have a question for Miss McDonald, and also I can go right in hand with Miss Atkins on family. My grandmother is the same exact thing for me. I don't know where I would be without her, and I feel like she is the source. Like she really is the source. So I can relate to that. But Miss McDonald, I heard you bring up Toni Morrison, and Toni Morrison famously said that she was inspired to write because no one took the little Black girl serious. So as a writer and a reporter, how does that resonate with you? How do you feel about being a Black woman in your field?
Ooh, and give me a second, because I'm like thinking about like how do I answer that? I don't know. I mean, because I've only ever been a Black woman. So I have to say, I do think like as I get older, I find myself just turning more to her wisdom, just to deal with kind of like everyday frustrations. But also like not even that, but just like the way that I decide to approach my job. Because most of the people who I write about, a great deal, whether it's actors or writers or directors or whatever, are Black women. And, I think the wonderful thing about Toni Morrison and about Alice Walker and about Toni Cade Bambara, about Gloria Naylor, is that you basically have this generation of women who create entire universes so that it's possible for you to just, like, you can just kind of take that for granted in a way.
Right.
That, that stories about Black women are valuable, like in and of themselves, rather than sort of having to like argue for that.
Right.
Which is, even though like that is something that still happens, I mean, even when I think it was probably like Toni Morrison was maybe 3 novels into her career at that point. When like the major sort of American literary prizes were kind of ignoring her, you know, whether it's the National Book Award or the Pulitzers or whatever. You know, and then it basically takes the Nobel Prize for people to be like, oh, and kind of give her the respect that she was due all along.
Exactly.
But the thing I think that I take away from Toni Morrison and from her writing, both like her fiction writing and her essays in The Source of Self-Regard, is that like I feel like she just gave me permission to just not care about what white people think.
We love that.
Like she, every time, you know, and because she's fantastic, right? It's like she is at the top of her game, and she also is just over and over again, like very clear about her self-regard, like her knowledge that like, you know, there's nothing inherently wrong with Black people, and in fact Black people are like pretty awesome, but there is something sort of like deeply wrong with white people's like addiction to white supremacy. Like that is a problem that they need to deal with and they have to solve. And it's there's all these like wonderful interviews of her with Charlie Rose, like basically saying this. And sometimes you just need a reminder. Like sometimes you just need a reminder of that very thing, because, you know, even though I write for a site that is, you know, by and about Black people, that doesn't mean that I never have to deal with whiteness.
Exactly.
And in those moments, you know, it's like I have her on my shoulder. It's great.
That's beautiful. I really do resonate with that when it comes to feeling like you don't have to always you can be yourself. You can use your knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I've sort of gotten more comfortable with as I've gotten older is just not having to not feeling like I have to prove myself all the time. Like I'm just like I am enough.
Just the permission to be comfortable, be yourself, write what you want, do what you want, be who you are, and show that it's a beautiful thing. Like this month, it's a beautiful thing, so we can showcase who we are as a people. And that's why I think Black History Month is so important, so many more people can hear their names.
Yeah, and it's also, you know, I think just, so I would say the other thing that was like really important and like foundational for me was that I went to Howard University. I grew up in North Carolina. My grandparents were sharecroppers. And I went to Howard. And so like, that was the first place where I could just sort of like, you know, like you're not Black first because everybody else around you is Black too, right? It's all different kinds of Black.
Right.
And so like, then I think when I'm writing about people, like say when I'm, you know, I had to write a remembrance of, or an appreciation of Chadwick Boseman when he died, you don't necessarily have to go through sort of like all the things that like Chadwick Boseman has done and kind of like represents on behalf of Black people in this, you know, in this way that can feel really like freighted. I can start with, these are the, like, this is what makes him such a terrific performer who will be missed. And the thing is that is like organically folded into how he approached his job, you know, with this knowledge and consciousness of what it means to be African-American. And so I think, yeah, like I feel like the way I write about culture just comes from a point of, I'm not like trying to explain Black people to white people. Like I am writing about Black people for Black people with the knowledge of ourselves that we just sort of take for granted that we have. And that's really nice and really freeing.
Right. It's not like you're actively trying to prove something.
Right. You get to
exactly.
feel comfortable in skin, you know. I understand that feeling. I actually want to ask you and Ariel the same question. The question I have is, what importance do you believe these past few years have had on Black history and on the Black community in general? Miss McDonald, as a reporter, for the Washington Post and for the undefeated. How do you see these past few years just for Black people?
Oh man. I mean, they're really monumental. And I think like the more every time I have a project to do that starts with me kind of like looking at, how people were dealing, say at the end of Reconstruction or like in Jim Crow or whatever. Because I think it can get easy to feel demoralized. That there are some things, we don't necessarily have, what we would call sort of this terror campaign of lynching that existed during Jim Crow, but that doesn't mean that Black people still aren't being lynched in a way. But I mean, that's basically like that's what makes the like watching the George Floyd video so difficult, is because we're basically watching like a modern day version of that thing. At the same time, I don't know. I mean, it's oof. Oh gosh, you really asked a challenging question right there, because
I try my best.
I remember like I was still working for the Post and I was in the newsroom the night that the news of Michael Brown's killing broke. And there was a small group of us, because this basically, that story kind of like picked up steam like in the evening hours, like overnight initially. And I happened to be one of the few Black people in the newsroom at that moment. Thankfully, because I could be like, no, this is important, and like we have to cover this. But also, I don't know. I think the last few years have kind of made me aware of how like delicate and fragile things are, like our democracy, and how much really does rely on people just having sort of a basic sense of like decency and wanting to do the right thing. Like if you don't have that, things can go south very quickly, as we saw on January 6th. It's really tenuous, but at the same time, I'm cautiously hopeful. I'm cautiously hopeful because of the feedback that I get when folks read my work. Even though like sometimes I'm also really frustrated, like so in April of 2020, we published a story that I had written on the 1918 flu pandemic, and how basically the same sort of structures of racism and white supremacy affected, who survived that pandemic, not only that, but just even things as small, not really small, but like whose bodies were respected. Because there was a point in 1918 during the flu epidemic where you basically had Black soldiers who were in the US military, who had to basically sort of fight just for the right to like be in the military, who were then basically given, sort of like the worst, most exhausting, usually disgusting on some level and other details. And part of that included like coming into American cities, I want to say even Philadelphia, and burying the Black people who had died of the flu, because there were white municipal workers who just refused to do it.
Right. So it always turns out to be the same thing that separates us in this country. And Ms. Atkins, I'm excited to hear your answer as a Black Lives Matter activist. I've researched a little bit on you, so if you want to answer the question, go ahead.
I'm not even gonna lie to you here. I wouldn't go as far as say I'm an activist. And I take that term very seriously because there are a lot of people out here that do tons of work to hold that title and to hold that name. I do support my people in every possible way. I don't know what you call that, but that is me. But I mean, that's tough to follow because I feel like partially these past few years have been traumatizing, but also hopeful because I've seen us come together. I've seen us figure out how to educate each other. I've seen us figure out how to deal with the tough times, even when there's things that we shouldn't even be dealing with. These things are unbearable. And I say traumatizing, not only because everything that we've been literally hearing about, but we see it every day. I mean, you guys probably have social media. It's on our phones every single day to the point to where we're desensitized to it. And it's like, oh, something else happened again. And to me, that's traumatizing, that the fact that we don't even think twice about seeing a video and we start scrolling past it. I think that's tough, and I think it's really bad for our younger generations that they have to see something like that every single day, because not only is it being posted, people are reposting it, and then you see in the comments of a lot of ignorant people that don't understand that it becomes mental for our younger people. It's tough, but it's something that, yeah, it's not fair. But then again, what does fair mean? Especially with everything that we're dealing with now. But like I said, I also understand that we are smart, we are educated, we know how to rally. You know, I'm not letting the things that I've seen.
It's 5 o'clock.
Oh, I apologize. But I'm not letting the things that I've seen take me out of my character or take me back or make me feel like I'm less than, because we're not. It doesn't matter what anybody says, how they act, or how they treat us. At the end of the day, you are who you are. You are strong, and the people that you have behind you and the people that are before you, we are strong. We're a strong people, and it's really not about separation. It is, in my thoughts, about unity. But we also have to be smart about unity, and we have to understand that, you know, for lack of better terms, you can't really deal with stupid. So at the end of the day, do the best that you can to not only educate your people, but make sure that you do the best that you can to be the best human that you can, and that the people behind you and the people to the left or the right of you also feel the same way.
Now,
Absolutely.
Miss Atkins, I do have a question for you that actually just popped into my head. It wasn't like it wasn't a rehearsed question or one that I already written down, but it reminded me of a quote. The quote goes, and I might butcher the quote, but it goes, beware when fighting monsters lest you become one, because when you stare into the abyss gazes back. What do you, when I say that quote reminds me of something, because when McDonald was writing, I mean, not writing, my apologies, when she was speaking, it reminded me of things that like Martin Luther King said about how you shouldn't judge people based on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. So do you believe that things like identity politics, which puts identity, outside identity first above the character of the individual, do you think that it sets us back, or do you think that it's net positive instead of a net negative?
That's a really tough question. But when you say identity, are you talking about identity outside of character as far as like the color of your skin, or just like classification?
Identity like not who, like the identity that people see instead of that they know. Like people don't see what's inside your mind, like what you're thinking, but just what they see on the outside. When that's what I mean by identity, not like your actual character.
Right. No, I don't agree with that. I'm a huge character person. I would love to get to know someone before I ever judge them. It's not always the easiest thing to do. It's not always the quickest thing to do. But I'm definitely a person of heart over head. So I hope that answers your question.
I mean, this could also go to Miss McDonald too. I'm just, that also just comes on.
Yeah, I
this
just want to
question was
add.
either one.
I just want to add something, which is like all politics are identity politics, right? You know, there is like the fact that we had, 43 straight white guys as president before the election of Barack Obama just doesn't sort of happen by accident, right? Like identity politics played into that too, because we had this, or at least there was a good portion of the country that had this idea in their head that like presidents are white men. Like that very much shapes how we see leadership and how we define it, and who is capable of leading. And so I think, when we think about identity politics, and we think about women speaking up for themselves, or Black people, or people of color, sort of agitating for kind of like the basic rights that are supposedly guaranteed to them in the Constitution. You like what we see when there's a failure to uphold those things, is very much identity politics. And it's not just when there's a failure to uphold those things, but it's also when like who gets to benefit from them. So, I suppose like let's take something like the gender pay gap, right? Because that's kind of gets framed as like an identity politics issue. And usually the way we talk about that is women roughly make like 70 or 77 cents for every dollar a man makes, as opposed to saying that men make like 30 cents more per hour, or 23 cents more per hour for doing the same job that a woman does, right? And sort of asking, well, what in sort of turning the tables in terms of thinking about what is earned, and what it actually means to live in a meritocracy, and like who sets the standards that everyone else is being judged by. And so I feel like we don't talk about identity enough. But when I say that, I always come behind that by saying, what I mean by that is that like, Black people have to think about being what it means to be Black, right? For the sake of our own safety and well-being, right? We can't afford to not think about those things, in the same way that, there is an experience that is common among most women, when it comes to thinking about like our surroundings when we're walking home at night, or, like being alone with someone in an elevator, or all sorts of things. So, when I say that all politics is identity politics and that we should think about these things, the thing that we usually haven't focused on quite so much is kind of the way, like the sort of this, what's the right word? The way that this country is so wedded to whiteness and all of the sort of privileges that it confers, that we kind of just take them for granted. And so like, I think one of the things that I do try to do in my work is really like push white people to think about sort of like the more ridiculous aspects of whiteness, that they haven't necessarily had to do, because it's just, it is the wallpaper of their lives.
You do bring up a good couple of points that actually brings me to think of a follow-up to my question. When you see things like the gender pay gap, like with the statistic you brought up, that's an average across all jobs, and it's not broken down into individual jobs and across all jobs, all ages, all amounts of work time, stuff like that. Do you think that it's healthy for us to think of things like that, such generalized statistics in a way, in a form of identity rather than individual merit? Do you think it's good for us to create statistics that are based around identity and generalizations instead of individual
Well,
merit?
I don't think they're based around generalizations because, like, let's take something like the gender pay gap, right? Like, the reason that we have those statistics is because the Bureau of Labor Statistics basically gathers this information about the American workforce like every year, right? And, you know, the thing about data is that it doesn't really tell you anything unless you add some sort of specificity to it, right? That like when you organize it. And so it's something like the gender pay gap. There is a danger in just sort of saying women overall make 70 cents to every dollar a man makes, because when you break that down by race and ethnicity, you know, what you find is that those margins are even greater for Latina women, for Native American women, for Black women, than they are necessarily for white women. And in order to think about solutions to that sort of problem, so that you actually have pay equity or pay parity, that means like thinking about, well, why are there differences like in between these groups, right? That we know because those statistics are being because there's those statistics, when we take them, are controlled for right. We're not necessarily like measuring, I don't know, a male engineer against like what a female nurse makes, right? Like we're doing sort of one-to-one comparisons when it comes to jobs. And so, you know, when you account for those sorts of things, like when you have problems that very much are bound up in identity because they are bound up in who we think is worth what. Yeah, it's really important. And you kind of have to look at those things and think about how to apply solutions that will address the underlying issues in the first place. Otherwise, you kind of have this thing that happens over and over again, right? Where you, like, we saw this with the Obama administration, where you had like policies that were put in place that were meant to, he loved to say, like, a rising tide lifts all boats. But like, if you're in a boat that has a hole in the bottom, or somebody else is in a boat that's actually a yacht, or you know, like maybe you're in a rowboat but like one of the oars doesn't work, you know, the fact that the tide has gone up, I mean, that might do a little bit of good, but like that doesn't fix everything. So yeah.
That was perfect.
I have some daunting news. We have to wrap up. This was an amazing interview conversation. I think I can speak for everyone. I can say that I'm honored to meet you both and to have this conversation, this interview. This was a pleasure. And with each sentence, I was like, oh, well, we could ask that and ask that, but we're out of time. So thank you both for joining us. Thank you, Miss Atkins, and thank you, Miss McDonald.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I hope, you know, because the Undefeated offices are based in DC, that like once it's actually safe for us to gather again, that you guys will come and visit the newsroom. Like if you'd like to, like, please do, because
I'd be honored.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. Please join us again in thanking our co-hosts Blair, Gary, and James, and our special guests, Miss Soraya Nadia McDonald from the Undefeated and Miss Ariel Atkins from the Washington Mystics. We will see you guys again soon in April for another edition of Black History Always with the Undefeated. Have a great night, guys.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you again for joining us for Black History Always with the Undefeated. We invite you to join us for our next discussion that will continue our focus on race and how you can be a part of the change we need for a brighter, better future. Visit dclibrary.org/Black History Always to learn more. Thank you, and see you at the library.